Welcome back, American Literature Scholars. In this episode, we're going to be talking about Pontiac. No, not that one. This one. Chief Pontiac. Chief Pontiac was born in Ottawa. He traded with the French, but with the British defeat of the French, his future changed significantly. The British commander treated the Indians as traitors and wouldn't supply them with powder and bullets. A Delaware Indian prophet named Nealon spoke of the return of the Indian ways, and Pontiac quotes Nealon quite heavily in his Allegory. Non-whites referred to this as the conspiracy of Pontiac. Chief Pontiac, borrowing from Nealon, uses this parable to stir up the Indians against the British. The French, remember, were their trading partners and allies. The speech preceded a resistance against the British. He opens with the story of a warrior seeking enlightenment. The ceremonies he undertakes here are peculiar to something called the vision quest. The ceremonies, in fact, the warrior is undertaking a vision quest here when he goes through the trials that he goes through to meet the Great Spirit. Now, in many respects, the trials that the hero here in Pontiac's allegory goes through are reminiscent of the hero's journey in Joseph Campbell's The Monomyth. There is the call to action, or call to adventure, which the hero can either deny or accept. There's the hero's journey is fraught with adversity. He goes through a number of trials. Oftentimes the woman is the guide on the journey, as is the case here with the woman in white. And then there's finally the confrontation with the father, which takes place when our hero meets with the Great Spirit. The speech and the parable are standard myth-making. The hero begins with religious ceremony and testing. He's seeking God, essentially, or the Native American equivalent of it, the Great Spirit. The hero encounters the woman who guides him on his journey. And this is the cradle, the developing of the child at the mother's knee. The hero's journey actually represents our progression through life from childhood to adulthood. In this case, the hero must return to the cradle, even the womb. And by discarding his weapons, his clothing, much of which came from the whites, he experiences a sort of rebirth, a return to the traditional values of his people. He's redeemed. He's a redeemed creature cleansed of the white man's influence. Right? After the trial, the mother is gone, having fulfilled her role, just as our parents step away from us when it's time for us to move on, to become adults and to move into the greater world. What comes next is what is referred to as the confrontation of the father. And this is something you see again and again in myth, from everything from Native American myths to Star Wars. So having cast aside all the false accoutrements of the white man's world, in this case representative of his sins, he is prepared to meet the Great Spirit. Right? The message imparted to him by the Great Spirit is the way to salvation for the Indians. His message is one of return to the old ways. He says, go back to the ways that I taught you. Go back to the traditions of the Native Americans, of the ways that I gave you and that worked for you for hundreds of years. He tells the warrior what the people must do to be saved. This is reminiscent of the story of Moses and other biblical stories. It bears similarities to the stories of the Ten Commandments in some respects. Okay, so this is it. This is the story of Pontiac and the hero's journey. Also, it's a sort of almost a biblical message in a way. He's like in the Old Testament when Israel would fall out of favor with God, and he would say, look, here's what you need to do to get back in my good graces and to be a productive and successful, happy people again. So this was by Pontiac. This is a parable he told to the Indians, hoping to stimulate their enmity toward the Brits, who were taking advantage of them. After all, the British, as our text tells us, were farmers. They wanted to exploit the land, whereas the French wanted to trade, and all they wanted was to come and trap and get furs, and import the furs back into France. So it was easier to make a an alliance with the French, who were their friends, than the British, who only sought to exploit and take over the land. Fascinating tale. A lot of interesting parallels here. And we have essentially a man confronting his God. Also, perhaps like in Campbell's monomyth, the confrontation with the Father, the hero's journey from where he was to a place of enlightenment. Anyway, I hope this was an interesting story for you. I always found this one kind of fascinating. That's it, and I'll see you in the next video.